No matter how much space we have to work with, there's something special about having your garden close to your home. As I shared in this video, changes are coming to my garden this year, and one of them is building a kitchen garden steps from my back door. But getting from dreaming of that kitchen garden to actually planting in it meant lots of decisions and several places where we changed midstream. In this new kitchen garden series, I'll share everything from the planning to planting, including selecting the raised beds, filling them, installing irrigation, planning the garden layout, and planting my first crops. Today I'll share with you about the planning and the building process, and to follow along with the other parts of the journey, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as I share when I go. Initially, we planned to add the raised beds where the above ground pool used to be. But then when I realized that the trampoline that was here was coming apart and this location was closer to my irrigation source, I decided to put the beds here. We're still not quite sure what to do with this space where the above ground pool is. What do you think? Fire pit, garden washing station, outdoor kitchen, seating area? Those are just a few ideas rattling around in my mind. I don't think we will get to this year at all, but if you have a suggestion for this space, we're all ears. Comment below. Once I settled on this space, I measured it all out. Next, I needed to go about selecting the beds. I knew based on my past experience that I for sure wanted Birdie's raised beds, but I needed to decide what sizes to choose. There were lots of different configuration options per size, but I ended up choosing the configuration that provided the maximum amount of square feet per bed. Then I used the GoodNotes app on my iPad to draw out the garden space with all of the bed possibilities. Next came the building. With the exception of this round 30-inch tall raised bed, I chose the shorter options, 15 inches high for the rest of these beds. The reason I chose the shorter options was twofold. Number one, the soil. It takes a whole lot of soil to build a large bed. But number two, I wanted to have a little bit more flexibility in the height of the crops that I chose. You can see back behind me, I have this elevated raised bed that's right about 30 inches tall. It's about the same height as this. And I find myself a little bit limited in the types of crops that I can grow just because it's already so tall. So I'm not going to choose something like okra to grow in a taller raised bed. In this case, when I'm using the 15-inch beds, I can pretty much do any crop that I want. Okra, tomatoes, indeterminate tomatoes, cucumbers, and they can grow really large. Not that you couldn't in a taller one. I just know that, especially with okra and some of those taller crops, I really don't want to be reaching too far to have to harvest. One thing I love about the Birdie's raised beds is that they are super easy to put together, but because I had 6 of them, my nephew came over and helped me out with the process. This was a really fun activity for us to do together, and it made the work go by so much faster. The next thing I had to do is to set them on the site. We tried so many different configurations. Even though I had drawn it all out on my iPad, it's different when you actually set it into place in the garden. So with a little bit of maneuvering, we finally decided on this configuration. But I wanted to keep a couple of things in mind, especially as my husband and I were finishing up the very last parts of setting these in place. First of all, I wanted to have space between the beds to be able to work. This was important to me because I have raised beds in my other garden that are way too close together. And while some of these beds are still a little bit closer than I would prefer, most of the close areas are with the corners, and I can deal with that. I just didn't really want any beds that were so close together that would make it hard to maneuver in between. And as I told my husband before, it's easy to see these as they are, but once you start growing crops in here, especially tomatoes, and I'm gonna have sweet potatoes in here and they're gonna spill over, you're not going to have as much space in between as it appears now. But what was important for me as a gardener was different than what was important to my husband. For him, it was important that the beds didn't butt up to the edge of the gravel so that mowing would be easier, which I guess that makes sense, but not something I had thought about initially. I had them all like on the outside perimeter, and he made sure that we had a little bit of extra space, which is fine with me. I think it all worked out well. But as you can see, we rearranged all of this configuration over and over until we finally settled on something we could agree on. Then of course I had to go back and update my planner with the new configurations of the crops because I'd actually already done my garden layouts, and I wanted to make sure that because I moved these beds, I wanted to make sure that that would still work for this season. Speaking of garden layout, with 6 beds needing to be filled, this is not an easy job. I needed to have my garden layout pretty set. That way I could know which beds would be planted in first. So if I didn't have time to fill all of these 6 at one time, which I didn't, I wanted to be able to focus on the primary ones that I would be planting in first. That meant this larger bed is getting filled first because carrots are going to go in this bed, and carrots are among the first crops that I plant in the early part of the spring. This bed will be the next one because cabbage and broccoli and onions are all gonna go in this bed, and they also get planted the first part of the spring. In my climate, I'm usually planting these in early March, give or take. The next one I'll need to fill is the middle one because I'm gonna be growing potatoes in this bed. Potatoes normally get planted about mid-March, so that'll be the third one that I'm filling. Now, these back 2 beds, these 2 are configured in the 4x5 configuration. These are the medium-sized beds. By comparison, these 3 right here are the small size, and they are 3x4s. But these are gonna be the 4x5s, and they are going to be where I'm gonna be growing tomatoes and peppers. But I don't need to wait until April to get these filled because I'm also interplanting with celery. And celery is something that I need to plant by the end of March. So my goal is to have these filled by the end of March. Finally, this bed over here will be the last bed that I fill because my first crops that'll go into that are going to be squash and zucchini. They can wait till the end, but having that garden layout set was really important so I would know where my priorities were in filling my beds. You can see that at the time of this recording, I've already started filling the first beds, and I'll share with you how I filled them and some decisions I had to make on the next video. I hope you'll join me with the rest of this kitchen garden series as I continue filling, putting irrigation, and planting my crops for my kitchen garden this year, and also planting them for a harvest for a 3-season garden. I hope you'll join me. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I'll see you on the next video.